Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's talk entitled Make and Measure the Potency of Cannabis Extract Nanoemulsions. My name is Eva Georgina. I'm the Director of Marketing at Industrial Sonomechanics. And also joining us today are Dr. Alexey Peshkovsky, President and Chief Scientific Officer of Industrial Sonomechanics, and Dylan Wilks, Chief Technology Officer at Orange Photonics.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Thank you for joining me today. I'm so glad we were able to get together for this discussion. So to begin, let's start by providing a brief overview of each company products, how they're used when it comes to making and analyzing cannabis extract nanoemulsions. Alexey, why don't you begin and tell us a little bit about the industrial sonomechanics technology, how it's used to produce water-soluble nanoemulsions?
Sure. Industrial Sonomechanics is a research and development company, mainly focusing on industrial applications of ultrasound. There are many types of applications, but for the purposes of this event, I'm going to focus on cannabis nanoemulsification, or making cannabis behave as if it were water soluble. This is one of the biggest applications we're involved with. So our role in this industry, the way we see it, is enabling our clients through our technology to produce their own formulations that approximate solutions of oil and water. Everyone knows that oil and water don't like to mix. If you stir them together, no matter how vigorously you do that, when you stop stirring, they will separate. But with our equipment and formulations, it is possible to make a nano suspension of droplets of oil in water. Typically, that's called a nanoemulsion. It is also possible to make solid suspensions of particles, but for the cannabis industry, it's more typical to make liquid oil in water nanoemulsions. For that, we offer ultrasonic equipment, which very briefly comprises a generator that drives the whole system. Then there's a transducer that looks like this. It converts ultrasonic vibrations coming from the generator in the electric form into mechanical vibrations, so the tip of it vibrates up and down. This drives the barbell horn. So this is core intellectual property that our company was formed around. When you see a shape like this, think industrial sonomechanics. So this is a typical barbell horn. This particular one is designed for flow-through applications. So the liquid flows through a reactor chamber or flow cell with a cooling jacket. The horn goes into that. The transducer is on top of it. I'm not going to connect it now, but it drives the horn, which vibrates inside this flow cell through which your nanoemulsion is flowing. And as it flows, this horn breaks the droplets into nano-sized droplets, which are then suspended in water. Transducers are also water-cooled, which is also a big part of our intellectual property. We're the only company that makes water-cooled piezoelectric transducers. And on the formulation side, which is the other side of this puzzle, we offer two types of NanoStabilizers. This is NanoStabilizer LT. It leads to liquid translucent nanoemulsions when you use it in combination with our ultrasonic processors. And this is NanoStabilizer LSO. With this, you can make either liquids, which would not be translucent, they would be opaque, but they can be dried into water-soluble powders of cannabinoids, which can also be compressed into tablets and consumed directly. Now, it's very typical for us to get questions on how do I know that what I made is what I was hoping that I would make. What should I know about my nanoemulsion to characterize it properly? So there are two ways. There are two main parameters that you need to characterize in the nanoemulsion. One is the droplet size, and we have another webinar that we did about a year ago, I think, on that. But a probably more important parameter is the potency. In other words, do I actually have the cannabinoids that I think and I hope that I have in this nanoemulsion? And for that, you can use either HPLC or a device that we personally really like and have and use very extensively, which is the Orange Photonics unit, which is very similar to HPLC based on the same principle, but is compact, very versatile, very easy to use, automated, guides you through the process. And so this is, I think, a nice moment to pass the mic to Dylan, who will tell you more about their technology.
Sure, thanks, Alexey. Yeah, so as Alexey mentioned, actually the device is behind me. So this is very similar to an HPLC. It's kind of a portable, shrunk down version of it. And basically we're using the same type of technology that a testing lab would use for all practical purposes. And the reason we do that is simply that we want to match the testing lab's performance and results over time. And the device is as portable as you can see here, and it's really used in a lot of different places in the cannabis industry. Obviously, we're talking about final product manufacturing here, where you can use for compliance testing, for R&D testing, that kind of thing, but also growers and pheno hunters and extractors use it for efficiency testing and that kind of thing. The device does measure 16 different cannabinoids, or up to 16 different cannabinoids, as well as a semi-quantitative terpene analysis. So you can do quite a bit with it. You basically get the same kind of data you'd get out of a lab report.
Thanks for that. So can you tell us a little bit of how it works? What are the basic principles behind your technology?
Sure. Yeah, like I mentioned, it uses what's called liquid chromatography. And that's, again, similar to how a lab would measure it. The basic idea is you take the product that you're going to measure and you extract it into a solvent. And that solvent is actually injected into the light lab. There's a little spot where you inject it. And what happens is a pump comes on and it pumps it through what's called a chromatography column. And I have an example one here. And basically what happens is the sample comes into the top of it, and then all the different cannabinoids have a different affinity to this column. So some might want to be really stuck in the column, whereas others might flow right through it without any kind of interaction with the column. So what will happen is all the cannabinoids come in the top, but out the bottom over time, you might get CBDA first, then Delta-9 second, and then THCA next, and so on. So it's a really interesting way to separate the different components in a mixture. And if you want to think of it in another kind of simplified way, you could imagine a mall that has many shoe stores and a door on either end. If you're a person that really likes shoes, which is certainly not me, but some people maybe, if you start on one end, it might take you a long time if you like the shoes to get all the way to the store and get out to the other side. Whereas you can imagine a person who doesn't love shoe shopping might go through and look at a couple shoes and then go right through to the end, and they're going to come out much quicker than the first person. And that's the basic process in a really simplified way of what's going on inside one of these columns. Once we've separated them over time, like I mentioned, coming out at the bottom of the column, we actually use UV light. We shine UV light through the sample, and we use that to detect how much of each cannabinoid is present. So that way we can separate and then detect how much of each one. That allows us to measure very accurately many different components in a mixture, in this case, many different cannabinoids.
I love the shoe shopping analogy. This is really, I'm going to use it if you don't mind. This is really, it's hard to find a good analogy for that. And yeah, there's absolutely nothing wrong about this analogy. It's equivalent in every way. I even know a couple of people that would come off that column very, very slowly.
I guess we have enough time to think about it. We've been doing it for a while, so.
Yeah, one thing that I wanted to discuss briefly because it comes up a lot, and I know that we've discussed it in the past and we found ways to make it work, but intuitively it makes sense that most people are used to analyzing cannabinoids in oils, or in their pure form, or maybe straight out of the plant. But in our case, when we make cannabinoids water compatible, and this also happens with HPLC labs, maybe primarily happens with HPLC labs. They are not always ready to accept a water-based cannabinoid formulation. It's uncommon for them. So your unit, luckily, uses a water-compatible mobile phase. The liquid that flows through the column is ready to accept water-based cannabinoid compounds. But because they're sitting inside nanoemulsion droplets, it's not always obvious that they will come out of them in order to get analyzed. So basically, with the shoe shopping analogy, it's not that you are shopping for shoes directly. You might be inside a bubble trying to shop for shoes, but it might be slippery, and so maybe you want to stay longer, but you don't. What would be your general recommendations for dealing with water compatible formulations?
Sure. I mean, you definitely hit the nail on the head with the complications around it. It's certainly doable, but you do have to give a little bit of thought around that. What we've found is that actually dissolving it into the water as a first step is probably the easiest way to do it, whether it's kind of a liquid nanoemulsion or really a powder. Getting it into the water allows you to do things through it a little bit more easily. And so kind of our general process, although it can depend on the product you're trying to measure and the concentration, all that, is to dissolve it in water. And then we generally add a methanol and then a acidic buffered mix. And the combination of those two allows the nanoemulsion to be attacked a little bit more, and then the actual cannabis that you're trying to measure to be pulled into the methanol. Also, there's a lot of other things you can do that improve that process, such as heat and sonication. And certainly, you know more about the sonication side of it, and it certainly doesn't hurt to do those kind of things as well. But that's, as a general process, that's what we use, or that's where we start anyway.
Yeah.
So liquid and powder nanoemulsions are prepared the same way or slightly different way?
So for analysis, actually, from our experience, not the same way. So for liquids, it's easy. At least liquids that are made with our formulations. I'm not sure that it's universally true, but for both our LT and LSO type nanostabilizers, unless you've dried the LSO, and LT you wouldn't dry, so that's straight as a liquid. Those you can analyze just using them straight, like you would any other cannabinoid formulation, with this mobile phase, because it already has water, so it's ready to accept the cannabinoids. But you have a lot of methanol. It's mostly methanol. So my understanding is that the droplets don't survive. The methanol part of your mobile phase, the solvent, actually extracts the cannabinoids from inside the droplets, and it becomes a normal solution in methanol. And those are basically what you always analyze with this unit. So it doesn't matter how you start it, whether it was a plant or an oil formulation. What goes into the column is a solution of cannabinoids in mainly methanol. But with powders, again, at least with the powders that we make and with formulations that we enable others to make, we find that there are a couple of things that you have to do. Powders are more resilient. The encapsulation, the shell of each droplet is a little bit more resilient. So first, obviously, you take the powder and you dissolve it in water. You need to reconstitute it into the liquid nanoemulsion that this powder came from initially. But still, the shells are strong. And so one thing you could do is sonicate that. But it's more important to, instead of sonicating that in water, actually take the appropriate amount, put it in your solvent, and sonicate that with methanol. That helps the extraction from inside the droplets out in methanol to happen. But there's one other thing, and it took us a while to figure out, and this is sort of half a suggestion for the users and half a question for you. So we find that the step that you recommend, which is filtration during sample injection, leads to incorrect measurements when you work with powders. Possibly some of the powders, some of the particles of powder survive and don't go through the filter, although we don't see any clogging, so it's not exactly clear whether it's really separated out or there's some other effect. But if we skip the filtration, then everything works perfectly. But I don't know if it's okay for the equipment.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that before. I think you're right, and I'm equally not 100% sure. Our guess is, so we've seen this even with things like tinctures where there's a really large amount of oil, especially when we're running a lot of oil to, you know, solvent ratio. And I think it's not necessarily just that it's you know, clogging the filter, but that there's potential absorption onto the filter substrate. So there are potentially some other filters you could use, but generally, I think you're right that the safest thing to do, if your sample doesn't have large particles, to just simply inject it directly into the machine. I mean, ultimately, the potential problem with that is that you could cause a clog, which is not a great situation, but it's you know, it's possible to push it back out. But generally, if you're looking at things like beverages or even those powders, once they're dissolved, there's just not a large enough particle to really worry about. So I think you're right on the nose there. Just skipping any kind of filtration step, because you're ultimately going to reduce the worry that you are affecting the results with a filter.
Excellent. And we're talking about submicron particles. We're talking a couple of hundred nanometers, maybe maximum. Maybe there are some odd particles that are, you know, 400 nanometers on the edge of the distribution. So it's not something that's going to actually clog any tubes. But you effectively end up using the column as a filter, I guess. So the column kind of retains these particles, but probably because the solvent continues to go through it, it washes it out. It's not the same with the injection. Once you've injected, that's it. Whatever is on the membrane is not getting washed anymore because you've injected and you're done. But in your unit, the solvent continues to go through the column. So even if it gets stuck a little bit, it gets washed out very quickly after.
It actually brings up another point. So the columns that we use are very low cost. So even in the case, you know, compared to an HPLC column, which might cost $1,000, these are $60. So you know, even in the case where you're destroying columns quicker than you'd like to, it's not like the cost is going to really break the bank there. So you're right, and generally, I think you'll find that it would mostly rinse it through with the methanol anyway. So yeah, so I think that's a great strategy.
It's an excellent point. Yeah.
So I know you mentioned you can use the machine with different types of cannabinoids to analyze different type of cannabinoids. Alexey, can you maybe show some types of nanoemulsions that we've worked with and analyzed in the past with this equipment?
Sure. Yeah, this is great. I have it. I have some here to put some visuals behind what we're talking about. So this, for example, is a CBD nanoemulsion made with NanoStabilizer LT, so it's translucent, meaning if you dose it into water. So I'm gonna dose it into this glass here. So this is approximately a dose. It goes in like this. So now I have about 10 milligrams of CBD in here, and it goes completely clear. So this type of nanoemulsion is very easy to analyze with this unit.
I actually have a sheet of analysis that we've done for this particular. Let me pull it up. Here we go. So this is exactly what comes out of the type of analysis sheet that we get analyzing this type of nanoemulsion.
Yeah, in the form of a COA, ready to go. So this is really a beautiful looking certificate of analysis that just comes right out. Let's see a powder. So this is one of the types of powders which actually works easily, and filtration is not a problem for this powder. I haven't mentioned this one. So this is called This powder is made with a type of nanostabilizer we don't offer in the form of nanostabilizer. We only make the finished product with it for now. But the advantage of it is that it also goes clear. It's the droplet size is very small. So this is probably a very large dose. I'm not sure exactly how much I'm putting, but probably more than I should. And so you stir that in, and it goes clear as well, like that. So
And
this one is also
that's
very
enough
easy
to
to handle.
mostly dissolve that. Is that correct? So it dissolves really pretty quickly in that water.
Yeah, it's already completely gone. I can't see anything. It dissolves in water and releases the nano droplets. So obviously, when we say water-soluble CBD, it's technically not true. Oils are not water-soluble if you're going to be rigorous about it. But they can behave as if they were water-soluble, which is really what you want. You want them to act as if they were solutions in water. So nanoparticle dispersion looks like a solution because the particles are very small. They're much smaller than the quarter wavelength of all visible light. And when that happens, light can travel unobstructed. That happens when all particles are much smaller than 100 nanometers. So the light travels right through, and the particles do not present a scattering obstacle to the light. So because it goes through it, the formulation is translucent or transparent, really, after you've dosed it. The nanoemulsions themselves are translucent because they're very concentrated. So you can see through them, but you see more than just clear water, let's say. It looks more like apple juice. Well, here it is. This is what it looks like. I don't think the camera focuses on it very well, but it looks translucent. After you dose it, it's clear. But when you make powders out of that, so this particular powder also goes clear, also is translucent, but the formulation is pretty complicated to make it. But for most intents and purposes, this formulation, so this is a different powder made with NanoStabilizer LSO. Once you dose that into water, it becomes slightly opaque. Yeah. Well, I don't know if you can see
So
that.
pretty clear.
Yeah, it's clear because the camera doesn't show it. It has a slight haze to it. But really, that's all. It's not much more than that. But another thing you can do with these powders is make tablets. And tablets are very attractive in many cases. So, I mean, a tablet's a tablet. That's what it looks like. All you do is you dilute it with a binder and you press it. The beauty of tablets is that you don't have to dose them into water. You don't need to stir anything. You don't need a beverage. You just put it straight in your mouth and it dissolves in your saliva, reconstitutes into liquid nanoemulsion where it originally came from. And this is your, saliva beverage. But those are the ones, so both the tablets and NanoStabilizer LSO-based powders are the ones that are more challenging to analyze. Those are the ones that we don't filter.
So these were nanoemulsions with CBD, but you can make THC nanoemulsions. You can make other types of things, right? And you can analyze those with the same equipment. You can analyze for Delta 8 or 9.
So you can make them with any cannabinoid or not cannabinoid. For example, this is coenzyme Q10. It could be any nutraceutical that is oil compatible that you'd like. But as far as we know, the Orange Photonics unit analyzes for 16 cannabinoids, isn't it?
Correct. Yep.
But you limit it to cannabinoids, not other things.
Currently, yeah. I mean, we've dedicated a device in that sense that although the technology underlying it could measure other things, the device is set up in such a way to make it very easy to measure cannabinoids, particularly.
Yeah, and I have to add that you have one of the features we really like, everyone who uses it at the company here, is that you have instructions on the screen. So, for example, this is something that we've wanted to do for a while. So, but with our equipment, we provide the standard operating procedures, but they're written. So you have to have this document and you follow it. In your case, obviously these documents get misplaced all the time. People lose them, people spill stuff on them. It's like maybe not the best way to provide them. And yours are right on screen. You can't make a mistake. It's very convenient. It gives you the right amounts of time. You can connect through Wi-Fi to your phone. It'll notify you, send you an email with your results. It's really very convenient.
It's great to hear that you like all the little features that we put in. So thank you.
Definitely.
I did want to actually circle back to one thing and sort of maybe ask a question or at least make a comment. And that is about the powders. And you mentioned that you put it with binders if you're pressing into a tablet. And I just wanted to mention, depending on the tablet composition, it could be more difficult or easier to get that extraction to happen, just because the binders have different affinities to either the alcohol you're using or the water that you're using to extract it. So we found those to be something that you've got to play with a little bit. If once you have your formulation of your binder and your tablet, that's great because you can easily find some kind of a solution that works, but it does take that little bit of playing around to get that. I'm not sure if you've noticed that or if you've used always the same binders or how that's worked on your end.
Yeah, so this is an excellent point. With tablets, it's even more complicated than with powders, because with powders, everything that is in the powder will dissolve in water. All the continuous phase that replaced water for it to become a dry nanoemulsion, if you will, all of that dissolves out because we have the flexibility to select the things that will. And even with that, we find that filtration shouldn't be done. So there's probably some minor amount. And the errors that we get when we do filter are not large, but they're there and they're systematic. They're always in the same direction. So we stop filtering, about 10%, 15 maybe. But with tablets, typically when you make tablets, you want quick disintegrating tablets, something that you put in your mouth and it falls apart when it gets moist. It absorbs, soaks up the saliva and kind of swells and forms, falls apart into powder. For that to happen, you use particular types of cellulose, which actually are not water soluble. They're hydrophilic. They are hygroscopic. They will absorb moisture very readily. They will swell, but they won't dissolve. And so you always have some undissolved fraction. And if you filter, who knows how much useful stuff you actually lost with it. So it's much more pronounced with tablets. Without filtration, tablets work just fine.
Sure, we've seen similar. And the other thing I just mentioned is if you're doing tablets, if you want it to go quicker, if you want your extraction to happen quicker, it's easier to kind of crush them if you can beforehand. I mean, it certainly works to not crush them, but we've just found that the amount of time is longer because you have to wait for that tablet to dissolve. But we've seen the same thing. And I think you're spot on there with the filtration. And again, the particle size is so small of the cellulosic kind of binding material that you're talking about that it doesn't really present a problem for analysis.
Yeah. In our case, to be honest, we just sonicate because we can, because we have more sonicators here than anything else. So we always have a sonicator within arm's reach. So we just sonicate it. But without it, I think it would still work. With your shakers, it would work. You just need to make sure that it works, calibrate it, not filter.
To make sure it's fully dissolved. Correct. Yeah.
So when you analyze the nanoemulsions, is there a minimum concentration that will show up? Is there some type of limit of detection that people should expect?
Sure. I think Alexey might be able to answer specifically for what he's seen, but I can kind of give the general answer anyway. Basically, Light Lab, it depends on what the weight and the solvent that you're using. So generally, Light Lab, if you're looking at something like a flour, a typical measurement for Light Lab, we're down to about 0.5% by weight. generally for things like infused products or as kind of a nano emulsion like this, we can get down to about 0.05% on the lower end. Although I do want to mention that we've been working really hard about driving that limit down. Our hope is to drive it down low enough that we can measure fully emulsified, beverages that have the dosage of 5 to 10 milligrams. So in the near future, expect to go lower, but our detection limit on the lowest end is around 0.05% at the moment.
Yeah, I have to, I guess, clarify in line with this, is that in our case, we work with nanoemulsions in their concentrated forms before they're dosed into beverages. So it's typically not a problem for us to have a 0.5% detection limit, because everything we work with is at least, well, it's typically at least 2%. Sometimes maybe it's 1%. So 10 milligrams per milliliter, 20 milligrams per milliliter. In some cases, it goes down a bit, or if maybe you want to know not only the primary cannabinoid, but let's say if you're, worried about whether you're above the legal limit on THC, then it becomes an important question. And for that, I guess you need to be down to 0.3% reliably. So this is the only situation where we would be concerned about the lower limit of detection. However, it would also be nice to be able to dose a beverage and measure that. The issue there is that you go down by a factor of 200. So if you had 1%, now you got, 200ths of 1%, whatever that is. So do you think that it's feasible in principle to get down to those levels?
I think it is. Yeah, there's some specialized things that we'd have to do to get down that low. For example, the amount that the light lab doses to the column would obviously have to be larger in order to get to that lower detection limit. So there are some things we can do to get there. I couldn't say for sure, because if we could do it right now, we would just tell people we could do it and we would sell it. But sure, yeah, that's certainly the goal. And I think it's feasible. But like you said, yeah, I mean, if you think about 10 milligrams as like a CBD powder, like a grain of salt, that's only a few grains of salt. So it is not much inside a whole can of drink. It's a surprisingly low amount of stuff that you're trying to measure. And then confounding that, of course, is the fact that there's other ingredients in there that you have to worry about that can damage the column, or that could mess with the chemistry. So you've got to be a little bit careful there. But it's been really interesting to play around with that for sure.
Yeah, and possibly you could maybe have a workaround where you take, let's say, 10 milliliters of sample and in some way boil it down to 1, and now you've concentrated everything by a factor of 10, stuff like that. Cannabinoids wouldn't be destroyed by boiling a water compatible formulation. So maybe there's something there.
Sure. But our goal is certainly to be able to get there, but we aren't quite there yet. It's challenging as well for even the testing labs to do this. So this isn't a problem of light lab per se, but just the limit of current technology is really the thing that's kind of limiting that right now.
Yeah.
So if a customer comes along and they say, I'm not detecting anything, what could be a reason why they would be not detecting something or losing potency?
I can answer a little bit on the not detecting things side, but Alexey might have more real world experience in this. But generally it's all comes down to sample prep. I mean, when you present a sample to Light Lab, basically whatever gets into the machine, it's more or less going to read correctly. But if your sample prep is such that everything's below the detection limit, or you've done a prep that hasn't fully dissolved, for example, a powder or a tablet, like you're going to get no readings or low readings. And that's really important to play around with things and make sure that you've got a robust sample prep protocol. And I do want to mention also that the same applies to labs. They're doing the same kinds of things to prepare these samples. So just watch out that the labs may not be as perfect as you think with these. They're presented with the same challenges, and it might make sense to work with them on making sure that's correct.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with all this. There are also other reasons sometimes for you not to measure anything. One of the reasons might be that you don't have anything there because of how the nanoemulsion was prepared. or maybe it's separated and you didn't notice. Maybe there was something incorrectly done, or maybe it got exposed to light for a long time and your CBD oxidized and became a quinone and is now not detectable anymore. Typically, your formulation will go pink when that happens. There's also this known effect where in finished beverages, in certain cases where you have, let's say, a can lining that is a polymer, there are some formulations where people have noticed that their cannabinoids, or rather nanoemulsion droplets that contain cannabinoids, stick to the lining of the can. It doesn't happen in concentrated nanoemulsions. So on our end, and for the concentrations that we typically measure with Light Lab, above 0.5%, this effect doesn't happen. At least we've never seen it. But in very diluted products, it has been reported to us that it can happen. We've never heard about this effect with our formulations, but people in general ask these types of questions. There are ways to inhibit this absorption, but it's important to point out that it's a minor effect. But when you get down to the levels where this effect could be detected, it would be really nice to use this unit to monitor it, because you can repeat the measurements very, very frequently and try different things and resolve it.
So that's one of the benefits, I guess, having that equipment in-house.
Why else? Makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Instead of sending every time for analysis somewhere else and waiting, several days until it comes back, you can just continue trying things and measure in real time.
Right. I think that's what we often see as a really big win for people using a portable device like ours, is that, that speed of development in R&D and also production as well. You don't have to stop your production and wait is really important. So agreed.
Absolutely.
And then, as you mentioned previously, a lot of labs are not exactly aware of the protocols of analyzing nanoemulsions as well. So oftentimes you might be sending it to someone who might not know the procedure and how to prepare the sample properly.
Yeah.
That's right. So if you have an in-house process that works, you may want to share it with them so that you get similar results. So just a thought for those that are interested in going that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what if is your equipment used to make official certifications, certificate of analysis? Because a lot of the times customers want to post one of those on their website next to their product, show that they're analyzing it, and what they claim to be in the nanoemulsion is actually there. Is your instrument able to do that? Are people in lab using it to make official certificate of analysis?
Sure. I'd say actually generally the answer is unfortunately no to that. Although in certain jurisdictions and countries, it's certainly the way that people have done it. And we have traceability and all that kind of fun stuff that would make it, feasible and reasonable to do that. Generally, especially in the United States, that you need to have a third-party lab do your final certification. So generally, Light Lab isn't used in that way, although it certainly is nice to know if you're getting what you're expecting before you send it out to the lab, because when you send it to the lab and get, for example, really low results, or you fail for some kind of a test like you're too high in THC, that's an expensive mistake to make. And so knowing that beforehand is really important. So I think there's still a lot of value in that product compliance kind of area, despite the fact that you really do need to send that last sample out to a lab, of course.
Yeah, that's what we do. We optimize a formulation and measure it continuously with your unit until we get it right. And then we send it out to get an official certification only one time instead of 50 times.
Right.
Yeah, we do plenty of contract manufacturing, and we don't want to be dealing with a third-party lab multiple times for the same sample, right?
Exactly.
I think I've heard several times from several of our customers that, gosh, this thing's paid for itself just in the fact that we caught a mistake or we caught a problem before we got to that end point where things were really expensive and difficult and could potentially even sink a company if you have your reputation on the line.
Great. Well, very well. Thank you so much for joining us, Alexey and Dylan. Thanks for participating.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, appreciate it. It was a great talk. I appreciate talking with intelligent people that are also interested in, cannabinoids and analysis.
Very interesting.
Pushing the industry forward in a scientific way.
This was a great amount of information. We get asked all these questions all the time by people. So it's really helpful that we were able to get together and just go over these questions. And if you're watching this discussion and if you have any more questions, you're welcome to contact us or Orange Photonics. So we'll post the information in the description of the video. And of course, stay tuned for another video. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Thanks, Eva. Thanks, Dylan. It's a pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Have a great
everyone.
day.